Body horror, bromance, and a commentary on the alt-right pipeline. These are all takeaways I got from 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine World War III. Deadpool and Wolverine World War III is a 3-issue limited series written by Joe Kelly with art by Adam Kubert. It came out in April 2024, just a few months before the Deadpool and Wolverine movie was set to release in theaters. Now, it used to be the case that comic book movies were influenced by comics. However, nowadays it's much more the other way around, where comics tend to shift and replicate whatever is currently happening in the movies. So it's not unusual for a comic featuring the same characters as a major movie to come out right around the movie's release date. And these comics tend to be pretty bland and feel much more like commercials to sell movie tickets rather than fully fledged out stories. So damn was I surprised when I read this story and found a really interesting breakdown of Deadpool's character and a commentary on a modern problem facing society. This story opens with Wolverine hunting down a serial killer in Canada. As he closes in on the killer's tracks, he finds Deadpool, who is also after the killer. The two exchange their typical dialogue, with a grumpy Wolverine not wanting anything to do with Deadpool, as Deadpool fawns over Wolverine and shows his typical raunchy style of humor. The two team up and eventually take down the serial killer, after which Deadpool expresses his wish to become more like Wolverine. Someone who lived a rough life, was used as a killing machine, and now became a hero and a good man. He goes on to say that sometimes broken is just broken, clearly referring to himself, and ominously says, "Third time's the charm," and takes off. Wolverine goes about his business, but can't shake the feeling that something is off with Deadpool. Wolverine later goes looking for Wade and eventually tracks him down to a building in Russia filled with a crowd of elites and a man called Delta. However, he finds Deadpool now looking nothing like himself and no longer with his signature style of humor. We find out that Delta is an influencer funded by the elite to scout the downtrodden superhumans who feel like they have no purpose and convince them to join him. He tells these people that he can give them purpose if they sign up for a procedure where he enhances their powers but in return takes away their personality and turns them into controllable shells of their former selves. Deadpool tries to kill Wolverine, but Wolverine is determined not to give up on saving Deadpool and stays by his side for months as they are deserted in the Russian tundra. Slowly, Deadpool starts to realize what has happened, but is incapable of ever returning to his former self. Eventually, Delta finds the two and kills Deadpool for going rogue and almost kills Wolverine, until we see a new Deadpool start to grow out of Wolverine's back. This is because earlier Wolverine unknowingly consumed a drop of Deadpool's blood, and the drop of blood mixed with Wolverine's healing factor regenerated Deadpool. The two defeat Delta, and several raunchy jokes about Deadpool being inside Wolverine later, Deadpool eventually separates from Wolverine, now returned to his former self. This was not at all what I expected going into this. While I wouldn't necessarily call this fun, I would say that it was a very thought-provoking, serious look at Deadpool's character. I'm honestly just shocked at the risks this story was allowed to take. I mean, it's Deadpool and Wolverine, but we only get maybe 5 pages of classic Deadpool before the remainder of the story is devoid of the signature humor and banter you would expect from a Deadpool and Wolverine story. And let me just say, I love it when comics get weird. And damn, does this get weird. The panels at the climax of this book where Deadpool is growing out of Wolverine's back is insane. I read this over winter break at 3 a.m. and when I turned the page to see that panel of Deadpool's torso sticking out of Wolverine's shoulder, I audibly said, ew. What I find most interesting about this story is something that I don't even think was meant to be included, but for me really stuck out a lot. And that's the commentary on the real-world manosphere and the alt-right pipeline of figures like Andrew Tate. For those who aren't familiar with this, for the past 7 or so years, there have been a very conceited effort from certain quote-unquote manosphere influencers who make lots of money by appealing to young men who feel they have no purpose in life, and slowly teaching these young men how to become quote-unquote high-value men. What may start as seemingly good advice to work out slowly becomes toxic lessons of hyper-individualism, that women are simply objects, therapy is useless, misogyny, homophobia, trust no one, and that the only true worth someone has is how much money they make. This is what is referred to as the alt-right pipeline because it starts with something seemingly unrelated to politics, but slowly sucks people in and teaches them to become Republican voters. It's a sad, intentional tactic engineered by the elite right to take confused young men and turn them into reliable voters. And as a young man in my mid-20s, this is something I relate to a lot. Not because I ever went down this pipeline myself, but because I've seen many former friends and guys who I used to go to school with go down this path. Because of the patriarchy and traditional gender roles, a lot of guys grow up believing their only worth is determined by their ability to provide and own a home. However, living under late-stage capitalism and a poor economy, providing becomes much harder, leaving these young men feeling sort of useless and purposeless. And rather than identifying the problem as capitalism, patriarchy, and gender roles, and embracing anti-capitalism and feminism to create a better world for everyone, they turn to figures like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate who lead them down this alt-right pipeline. People who I used to consider good friends have allowed themselves to be turned into someone unrecognizable from their former selves. They hate the women in their lives and are just miserable cogs in this right-wing machine. And these are grown men who have the autonomy, the ability, and responsibility to say no to this garbage. And they are responsible for the hate they bring into this world. So I say all of this not to absolve these young men of their bigotry and the damage they are doing to society, but rather to warn young kids like my brother who will soon be approaching early adulthood to be wary of figures like Andrew Tate, figures like Delta, the antagonist in this book, who was funded by the elite and whose job it was to find superhumans who felt like they had no purpose, such as Deadpool, and slowly get into their head and influence them to become unexpressive shells of their former selves, turned into weapons for the elite, and who now attack people and hate the people who they once called friends. Now, in the story, Deadpool had to die in order to become himself again. But unlike comic book characters, real people do not have regenerative healing factors and plot armor to come back from the dead. You only have this one life, so don't give it away to men who sell you hate, people who tell you to hate other people and to never be vulnerable, that money is all that matters in this world. These are weak pretend men. Strong men, women, and folks of all genders are people who protect marginalized groups, who fight against systems of oppression, lift each other up, and know how to ask for help. They are strong enough to be gentle. And that's all I've got for this video. I hope you enjoyed my review of Deadpool and Wolverine World War III. Leave a like, drop a comment with your thoughts. You can follow me and see more stuff like this. Everything gets posted to YouTube first, so check out Brexton's Thought Bubble on YouTube, and don't forget to be strong enough to be gentle. Have a great day.